Team Fortress 2, one of the best and most iconic first-person shooters of all time. Starting off as a simple mod for Quake starring 9 mercenaries, it was the most popular mod to run during that time, almost 50% of servers running it. It was made by a group of Australian developers, Robin Walker, John Cook, and Ian Coley in 1996. They then got adopted by Valve to have them develop a sequel and a much more realistic take on Team Fortress named Valve's Team Fortress, using the Gold Source engine. That got cancelled. So they just remade Quake Team Fortress on the Gold Source engine, and naming it Team Fortress Classic. And after years and years of development trying to make the sequel to Team Fortress the best that it can be, going through 2 prototypes, namely Team Fortress 2 Brotherhood of Arms using the Gold Source engine, and Team Fortress Invasion using the Source engine, until they finally landed on a version that they were happy with. And it's the game that we all know today as Team Fortress 2, using the Source engine, same as its prototype and Half-Life 2. Now, despite using the same engine as Half-Life 2, I really can't help but notice the weird quirks of the engine, mainly its performance. Now, it doesn't really help that there were so many updates to the game that left its code in an abysmal state. The community nicknamed it TF2 Spaghetti. Now, it wasn't always like this. Believe it or not, when Team Fortress 2 got first released, the minimum requirements were actually pretty low, only asking for a Pentium 4 or any processor that's running at 1.7 GHz, 512 MB of RAM, and a GPU that supports the DX8 API. So, it was fair to say that the game was pretty easy to run. But what happens when you use a PC like that to run TF2 today? Spoiler alert, it barely walks. Now, like I've said before, TF2 isn't really the same as it was back then. Not just gameplay-wise, but also just the game engine itself, with its performance drastically changing throughout the years, and the requirements on its Steam page being incredibly outdated. Even the recommended requirements can barely play the game. Why is that? Now, like I said before, the updates that the game was given is probably the main reason, so it's good that Valve stopped updating the game, huh? Oh no. Now we have the why, but what about the how? How do the countless updates to the game affect its performance? Now, TF2 uses a technology called the particle system in its engine. Typically, when you see effects like explosions, fire effects, bullet effects in games, your GPU or graphics card is usually the one that's rendering them. But because of TF2's particle system, the developers coded its engine to basically make the CPU do the rendering for its effects. And because of that, TF2 is very light when it comes to its GPU usage. Heck, you don't even need a dedicated GPU to run TF2 with 60 FPS. It's so light that you can even just use Intel's integrated GPUs. Now, this is both a blessing and a curse because of the particle system primarily using your CPU, since the updates added so much more new content, like new particle effects for weapons, unusual hats, weapons, taunts, new map elements, etc. It's really no surprise that this system has been abused throughout the years, the new content piling onto your CPU more and more, resulting in less and less performance. And to add more salt in the injury, having multiple cores in your CPU does very little help with your frame rate, since TF2 was made in an era where software was only utilizing 2 cores at most. That is, until now. Recently, Valve has updated the engine, and they've been updating it since its release, going from Source 2007 when TF2 was first released, to Source 2009 in, 2009. To then being updated again to Source 2013 multiplayer, to getting its final update in 2024, when Valve made TF2 a 64-bit program for Windows. And since then, TF2 has at least been trying to utilize all of your cores, especially if you have less than 4 threads. And any more than that, well, it does try, but you'll see later, it's really apparent that TF2 doesn't really utilize all of your cores efficiently that much. Now, I'd be lying when I say TF2 is a heavy game, when in reality, the devs did a pretty good job at optimizing it for the modern day. But I'd be lying again when I say that it runs flawlessly right out of the box, since you do need to tweak some of its settings via console commands if you have a fairly low-end PC. So now, I want to test TF2's performance to see how it holds up in 2 certain machines. Now, first up is my main gaming PC with its default state. a Ryzen 5 5500 running at 4.2 GHz, 2x8 sticks of DDR4 memory running at 3200 MHz, a Sapphire Pulse RX 484GB graphics card with the core clock running at 1372 MHz, with the memory clock running at 1825 MHz. The second machine that we'll be testing on is that same machine, but this time I tapped its kneecaps. This time, the Ryzen 5 5500 is now running at 1.8 GHz and disabling 4 cores. So now it'll be a dual-core CPU with 4 threads. The 2x8 sticks of memory are now running at 2133 MHz, and the video card now having a 650 MHz core clock and a 1250 MHz with the memory clock. I'll be testing it in 2 scenarios. First is the game running in its vanilla high settings with no console command changes, and the second is the same setting, but this time with special commands that optimizes the game in my opinion, which I'll put in the description below. And the map we'll be testing on is Koth Suijin, Saijin, the Japan map. Since from what I've heard and what I've played, it's pretty much the most intensive map in the game because of its optimization being, well, good as me playing as sniper, which is to say, bad. I'll also be testing with bots, since I have found out that they are more intensive for your system, so it's a nice benchmark. Now that we have these machines, how well do they perform? For the vanilla high settings on my personal default setup, I don't think I need to say that it ran incredibly well, with a 203 FPS average and a 130 FPS 1% lows. And for the kneecap system, it was obvious that it did a lot worse, but not super worse since we were still hitting a 60 FPS average, 80 in fact. But there was an issue. When going into intense fights, the FPS will be dipping into the low 30s, but never below that. But still, there will be lag spikes and the FPS dropping into the 30s from time to time, which is playable, but not ideal. Now, let's go into the same demo, but now with a graphics config that optimizes the game for us. And the boost to our FPS is really good. For the default system settings, our average goes from 200 to 240 FPS with a 1% low of 150 FPS. Like, we were already getting great FPS, but that just made things a whole lot more amazing. And for the kneecap system, it was a lot better. Our average didn't improve much, only going for 90 FPS, but it's the 1% lows that really showed the difference, since we went from a 30 FPS to a 50 FPS, which basically wiped out all of those weird stutters, which was great. So, what's the conclusion here? Well, first, I want to go on a few details during my benchmark runs. One is the GPU. Even on the lowest clock speeds, it wasn't really hitting a full 100% usage. Heck, it was barely hitting 80%. But I did do a small test, pinning my OC setting to the lowest clock setting, and there was literally no difference in FPS. So again, having a top-of-the-line GPU and TF2 isn't really that important. For the CPU tests, on the kneecap settings, TF2 was really pushing on those 4 threads, hitting 70 to 80% usage while in a game. Meanwhile, in the default settings, it doesn't know what to do with those extra threads that it was given. TF2's engine is really weird, even after Valve updated to 64-bit. Just relying on the default settings in TF2 isn't even barely enough to squeeze the best performance out of it. I mean, we just saw the kneecap system actually becoming a lot more playable when we added a graphics config. But I still think Valve did a pretty solid job when it comes to optimizing TF2 since 2007. I mean, we got so much new content for the game, and it still runs pretty fine. You might need a config to optimize it, but there are countless videos showing you how to do it. So in conclusion, maybe the real updates were the friends we made along the way.